We also have a cruise terminal in the port of Kingston, or fifth and latest cruise terminal located at Port Royal. And we have, as I mentioned earlier, a recognized transshipment port, one of the leading transshipment hub in the Caribbean. We also have the Caribbean Maritime University located at the Palisados Strip. And here, Jamaica trains seafarers, whether deck or engine officers, for the global shipping market. So we have a number of assets that we are capitalizing on to position Jamaica as a major maritime center. So shipping plays a critical role. Jamaica is an island state. We have an open economy, and so we depend heavily on shipping for our energy. We don't produce oil, or not yet, or LNG. We import oil. We export bauxite and aluminum. Most of our raw materials are imported. We don't make motor vehicles, buses, cars, etc. They're all imported. They all are carried on a ship. Our basic food items, flour, rice, all imported. And so we depend heavily on shipping to underpin our economy. But what happens if shipping becomes unsafe, insecure, and environmentally damaging? These consequences are not restricted to the sea. They will reverberate throughout the entire nation, disrupting the economy, straining public services, threatening coastal communities, and degrading the marine environment on which Jamaica heavily depends. Our tourism product is marine-based. And so if that product is compromised by an oil spill, Jamaica will suffer. So it's important to have a sustainable maritime transport system. This is what can happen when we have shipping that is not sustainable. If you have old ships that are not properly regulated, in this case an oil tanker, it can break in two. And in the case of this vessel, the Prestige, it caused widespread damage to the coast of France and Spain, and it spawned quite a bit of litigation. This also happens when you have unsustainable shipping. 50% of the cargoes carried by ship are defined as dangerous goods. And if you don't store them properly, you'll have problems. You'll have fires that our regular fire service cannot manage because it involves dangerous goods that are being transported from a foreign port, maybe transiting Jamaican waters, or I should calling out a Jamaican port. We can go to a local example. In 2024, during Carnival, a barge overturned and caused an oil spill, which not only impacted Tobago, but Grenada and Aruba. This barge was carrying sanctioned oil. And in the absence of regulation, in the absence of enforcement, where you have an unsustainable shipping practice, it can compromise your marine environment. It's important to have a regulated shipping sector because, as in the case of these two portals, which are LNG vessels that are supplying power to Jamaica's bauxite and alumina industries, it's important for us to regulate this activity because, in the absence of regulation, we may have a disruption in our electricity supply or in the production of our bauxite and alumina. In this photo, we have 3 car carriers. I mentioned earlier that we do not produce our cars on buses. They arrive in these ships, specially constructed to carry cars. But if we don't have a sound and sustainable regulatory framework, then we may not have these ships calling at our port, and we may have environmental issues linked to these vessels. The vessel in green is a container ship that visited our port a few months ago. So when you speak about sustainability, what do we mean? And the World Commission on Environment and Development has a formulation, fairly simple. Development that meets the present needs without compromising the ability of future generations to meet theirs. When we drill down to sustainability in the maritime sector, we need to speak about things like preventing and controlling pollution and the climate impacts of shipping, facilitating trade, ensuring that ships move safely and there's predictability in their schedules, and of prime importance, ensuring that the seafarers on board these ships have decent work and their human rights are respected. All are aware of the Sustainable Development Goals, and a number of them impact shipping. I just mentioned Goal 14, Life Below Water, Goal 13, Climate Action, and you have several other of the SDGs that are relevant to the maritime sector. Now, when you look at the ecosystem of shipping, I have divided them into 2 broad categories. You have the seafarers, the owners, the bankers, the attorneys, very important, the attorneys, the ship managers, the charterers, the shippers, the consignees. And when the ship gets to the port, you have your stevedores, your truckers, freight forwarders, ship agents. On the public sector side, you have 3 main categories. You have the flag state. That's the state whose laws govern the operation of the ship. When a ship is on the high sea and there's a birth or a death, those activities must take place somewhere. The high seas are owned by no one, and so the law of the flag is what governs the activities that take place on a ship, especially when the ship is on the high seas. Then you have the port state. Most of the ships that call at Jamaican ports are foreign flag ships. So you have the flag state that is exercising jurisdiction over these vessels. But when they come into your port voluntarily, the port state has limited jurisdiction to board and ensure that those ships comply with safety, manning, security, and other standards. Then you have the coastal state. That's a state in whose waters a foreign ship transits. As a coastal state, Jamaica has responsibility for search and rescue, weather reporting, and similar activities over ships that are transiting or waters. So that is the ecosystem of international shipping. Now, shipping is sui generis international. And because of that, it is subject to a particularly high level of regulation. You can imagine a single ship is going to different countries, different ports during one voyage. A cruise ship may call at 5 different ports over a 7-day itinerary. Each country has its own laws. And so it's important that shipping is regulated and there's some harmonization in the regulations of shipping. Of course, you have the cross-border operation. In shipping, we speak about toll. So passengers or crew. So when a ship goes down and a seafarer is lost, they speak about a soul being lost. Of course, ships carry cargo. But the ship also presents risks that have consequences for safety, for security, trade, disruption of trade, and of course, the marine environment. Here's an example of the Ever Given. A few years ago, this vessel, which was over 400 meters long, can unravel a stadium, track and field, the track. This 400-meter ship got stuck in the Suez Canal. The flag was Panamanian. The crew were from India. The owner from Japan. The charterer from Taiwan. The ship management company from Germany. The company that surveyed the ship to ensure it was safe to carry the containers was out of Japan, out of America, ABS. The insurer was a UK insurer. It happened in Egyptian water. And the salvage company was a Dutch salvage company. That's an example of the various jurisdictions, contracts that come into play when a single ship is undertaking a voyage and the ship runs into trouble. So a number of maritime contracts apply to shipping. You have to build a ship. It's a shipbuilding contract. You have a sale and purchase of the ship. You, as an owner, you're just an investor in the ship, so you engage a ship management company to run the ship. Many ships are chartered, voyage charters, time charters, bareboat charters, where the charterer is in control of the ship for a period. With seafarers on board, you need seafarer employment contracts. Then where the cargo is concerned, you have your international sales contract, you have your bills of lading, then you may have other contracts, salvage, towage. At the end of life of the ship, you have a demolition contract. So contracts play an important role in shipping. However, international shipping requires technical rules and internationally accepted standards which govern the construction, the operation of the ship. In the post 9/11 era, we have security standards applied on board ships to reduce the threat of a terrorist attack. We are all aware of the increasing increase in the number of extreme weather events. We need to have standards governing the operation of ships in these conditions. With climate change, if people use that term anymore, ships are now operating in polar conditions because new routes are being opened up because the ice is melting, especially in the Arctic. Ships carry dangerous goods. You need standards to govern the carriage of these goods. You need harmonized standards for training and certifying seafarers. You have your pollution incident. And more recently, you have issues relating to the transfer of alien invasive species by ship. Maritime contract law and tort law cannot adequately regulate a sustainable transport system. Important, but based on its international nature, ordinary maritime law, maritime contract law, and tort would not be an adequate remedy. So, the international regulatory framework is critical to ensure we have a sustainable maritime transport system, and the obligations typically arise from UNCLOS, International Maritime Organization, and the International Labour Organization. Those are, you could say, the primary sources of international maritime law, which will underpin a sustainable maritime transport system. So, UNCLOS, we all know about UNCLOS. It's the Constitution for the Oceans, and it essentially supplies the legal and jurisdictional foundation for maritime regulation. Article 211, 1, essentially says that a competent agency should be used to establish international rules and standards for the prevention, reduction, and control of pollution of the marine environment from vessels. Now, this competent agency is the International Maritime Organization. And the IMO, as it's called, regulates the safety of shipping, the security of shipping post 9/11, and the protection of the marine environment. So it's a specialized United Nations agency. Since its establishment in 1948, more than 50 international instruments regulating safety, environmental performance, facilitation of shipping have been adopted by the IMO. There are 176 member states. Jamaica is one. Jamaica is actually on the council of the IMO. And the IMO regulates over 50,000 merchant ships trading worldwide. Around 90% of the global volume of trade is carried by sea, and so you can imagine the importance of having the IMO to set the international standard for ships. There are 4 pillars of maritime law. The Solas Convention, which was triggered by the Titanic in 1912. The Marpole Convention, which addresses pollution prevention, which was triggered by another incident, Torrey Canyon. You have the STCW Convention, which regulates the standards of training and certification for seafarers. And the final pillar is the Maritime Labour Convention, otherwise known as the Seafarers' Bill of Rights. Other relevant treaties govern responding to an oil spill, that is the OPRC Convention. Then we have the Civil Liability Convention and the Fund Convention. These are critical to ensuring we have a sustainable maritime industry, because these 2 conventions provide compensation and establish liability for oil pollution damage. They provide for a strict liability regime, meaning once the oil is in the water, the ship owner is liable. There's no need for any mens rea. From the oil is in the water, the ship owner is liable. However, the ship owner can limit his or her liability according to the limits set out in these 2 treaties. The treaties allow for something called direct action. And under maritime law, the owner of the ship has to pay the claim, and then the insurer will reimburse the owner. This or these treaties allow for the claimant to claim directly against the insurer. It's something that is not found under or contract law or insurance law, but under maritime law, typically you have to pay to be paid. But this treaty allows for direct action against the insurer. Pure economic loss is actually allowed under this convention. So, for instance, a fisherman who has been prevented from fishing because of an oil spill, if he goes to court, he cannot prove to the judge that his property has been damaged because he does not own the fish until he catches it. Under these treaties, a fisherman can actually make a claim for pure economic loss. Similarly, a hotel which doesn't own the beach or the sea can make a claim for loss of earnings arising from a pollution incident that impact their revenue. And the third convention listed here is the Ballast Water Management Convention. Now, ballast water is what is used to ensure ships are stable in the water. When a ship does not have cargo, the ship pumps in ballast water. That ballast water can contain alien invasive species. And so when the ship goes from one port to another, it can actually transfer these species and even cholera by virtue of the discharge of ballast water. So there's a convention that actually regulates the transfer of alien invasive species in ballast water. Hull fouling and underwater noise pollution are not yet addressed in treaties. However, as we speak, steps are being taken eventually result in a treaty being adopted. Underwater noise pollution that impact especially sensitive mammals like dolphins and other fish. So where there's heavy ship traffic, you may find that the fish may not continue to use that area as their habitat. Hull fouling, that is a carriage of alien invasive species on the outside of a ship. So there are a number of initiatives that are ongoing, which in the future may lead to a treaty which will contribute to the sustainability of shipping. That ship, or that part of a ship, is evidence of the demolition of a cargo or container ship. At the end of a ship's life, it is taken to a yard in Bangladesh, in India, in China, some ports in Europe, where the ship is demolished. Now, that ship may have asbestos, hazardous materials, and so there's a treaty that allows for the safe recycling of ships. Here on the screen is a picture of other initiatives being undertaken to ensure the sustainability of the shipping industry. I'll highlight the first two. Emissions from ships contribute to 3% of global emissions. It's about the size of Germany's national its emissions. The IMO is seeking to reduce emissions from ships to net zero by 2050, aligning shipping with the Paris Agreement. This now requires that we have new fuels like LNG, methanol, and ammonia. These fuels are very expensive, and so what will happen in the future is that you may find that the cost of shipping will increase, and so too the cost of energy, commodities, motor cars, because as I indicated earlier, most of our items are transferred or transported in ships. Now, there are some issues that compromise the sustainability of shipping. A current issue is what we call the shadow fleet. That's a fleet of vessels carrying sanctioned Iranian, Venezuelan, and Russian oil. Many of these ships are carrying or using false flag. So in the Caribbean, a number of states, especially Guyana, are being used by unscrupulous operators flying their flag illegally. Next month, there'll be a meeting of the legal committee, the IMO, where we'll try to provide some guidelines to reduce the practice of using false flags. You may have heard when the United States government intervened in Venezuela, they were seizing a number of oil tankers. Two of these tankers were flying a Guyanese flag, and Guyana indicated that they had no idea, or actually they don't have a ship registry. So these tankers were using their flag illegally. Why is this important? The sanctioned oil has to be landed somewhere. So what happens? The oil is rinsed. The shadow fleet tanker rendezvous with another tanker carrying bona fide oil, and there's a transfer of oil mid-ocean. It's blended and then landed as another product. That can happen in our waters. When you have two ships that are involved in an illegal activity, transferring oil, the risk of an oil pollution incident is very high, which can compromise our coastal resources. So, what are we doing about it? The Maritime Authority of Jamaica is playing a critical role in ensuring that Jamaica has a sustainable maritime transport system. And the Maritime Authority is a statutory corporation established under the Shipping Act and has the primary mandate of regulating and developing shipping in Jamaica. There's a number of functions. It administers a ship registry. It regulates certification of seafarer, regulates the safety of Jamaican ships and foreign ships in Jamaican waters. And here are a few of the yachts that are on the register of Jamaican ships. The Maritime Authority carries out port state control on behalf of Jamaica. And so we inspect the ships for security, pollution prevention standards, manning, and safety standards. And in the event, God forbid, of a casualty, the Maritime Authority conducts marine casualty investigation. In terms of the landscape in Jamaica, we have internationally trading vessels or container ships or bulk carriers or cruise ships. We have vessels operating within Jamaican waters or tugs or barges or fishing vessels or floating storage production unit. That's the port of that LNG vessel. Then we have our support services, towage, pilotage, all using vessels. Then we have our water sports or recreational and our fishing sectors. All of these sectors have to be regulated. All of these sectors have to operate in a sustainable way. The Maritime Authority carries out the responsibility of regulating the shipping sector, including the water sports, recreational and fishing sector. So the authority is the focal point for the International Maritime Authority and the International Labour Organization in Jamaica. The Maritime Authority implements the treaties to which Jamaica is a party. We implement safety-related treaties, SOLAS Convention, the collision regulation. We implement the International Ship and Port Facility Security Code that addresses security. We're responsible for examining and certifying and setting the standards for seafarers. And more recently, the Maritime Authority regulates the living and working conditions on board ships. So things like wages, food, water, accommodation, injuries, deaths, repatriation of seafarers. And finally, the Maritime Authority implements a number of conventions dealing with the prevention of pollution, responding to pollution, and liability and compensation for oil pollution damage. All that is good. Ratifying the convention, having an institution to implement. However, the case of CP King against DY Fishing Limited and DY Fishing Limited against the NRCA has highlighted the importance of incorporating your treaties into national legislation. This is a case where the NRCA allocated quotas for conch fishermen to ensure the sustainability of the conch fishery or the conch resource, and the operators took the NRCA to court because the treaty that Jamaica had ratified, that the NRCA was using to allocate quotas, had not been incorporated into local legislation. So the judge said, essentially, that you cannot implement these treaties unless you have incorporated the treaty provisions in legislation. So what has Jamaica done where this is concerned? We have passed the Shipping Act of 1998, which incorporates a number of the IMO treaties that we just mentioned. In 2018, we passed the Ballast Water Management Act, which addresses the transfer of invasive species in ballast water. In 2020, the Shipping Amendment Act was passed, which incorporates the Bill of Rights for seafarers, the Maritime Labour Convention. And we're currently finalizing the Pollution Prevention Response Liability and Compensation Bill. Once this bill is passed in Parliament, then we would have had a comprehensive framework to deal with pollution incidents that happen in Jamaican waters. Jamaica is an island state with an open economy, and therefore it's important that we have a sustainable maritime transportation system to underpin our ambitions for economic growth and development. This, however, requires not only policies, ratification of treaties, and legislation, but also the effective implementation of our flag, port, and coastal responsibilities. And we can only do that through interagency cooperation, advocacy, and more recently, with the events that are happening in the Middle East, we need global security. Because when there's insecurity, then things like oil prices increase and the cost of goods will increase. Where interagency coordination is concerned, we actually have a memorandum of cooperation with about 9 agencies. I'll give you an example of one. The National Land Agency. What does that have to do with the sea? National Land Agency has a hydrographic department that conduct surveys, what they call bathymetric surveys, to determine the depth of the harbor. That data is used to prepare the charts that ships use to safely navigate. So every one of those agencies has an obligation in relation to a sustainable maritime transport system. And we have actually in place a memorandum of cooperation to ensure that this interagency collaboration is sustained. Advocacy, that's up to you, the young attorney. So we're looking forward to your interest in the area, your advocacy to ensure that the laws are passed, the treaties are ratified, and that the policies are put in place to ensure that Jamaica and your whatever other jurisdiction you're from has a sustainable maritime transportation system. I'll end with a picture of one of our yachts, and thank you very much.
So we want to thank Mr. Smith for a very insightful presentation. And before we do the vote of thanks, I want to find out from our audience if there are any questions that come out of the presentation just now. I, for myself, was particularly in my thought processes, I was pleased to make the connection between the importance of a sustainable maritime transport system and how that impacts on the actual environment, not just the marine environment, but our environment generally here, and questions that may be connected to the sustainability of things like tourism, for example. So we looked at the commercial side, part of the commercial side, but we also look at things that other things that we do locally in terms of developing our economy. And so in my mind, I had some interesting connections taking place there. Are there any questions from our YouTube platform, Mr. Cousins? No questions there. And in the room? So at this time, I would invite Mr. Joshua Ramirez, another second year student here at the Norman Manley Law School, to move the vote of thanks.
Good afternoon, everyone. So I want to take this time, and I must say that it is truly an honor to give the vote of thanks in today's final session. And thank you, sir, for such an insightful presentation on the sustainability of shipping and maritime. I must say that you have a clear message today to clearly see the balance between the operational efficiency and also the environmental responsibility. So on behalf of the Norman Manley Legal Aid Clinic, I present this token of appreciation. Thank you. Also, on behalf of the Legal Aid Clinic, we want to present this small token of appreciation to Ms. April Grappine for also taking time out of our busy schedule to be with us today.
That thanks Mr. Bertram, because it really was an insightful presentation. I learned a lot. But that is the nature of the presentations that we have on offer here at our annual Legal Aid Clinic Fair. We invite you to join us tomorrow for additional presentations treating with a whole range of topics. Again, treating with the question of sustainability, the law of the land, sea, and me, creating a sustainable future for all. There will be presentations, I understand, tomorrow from several members or several of our students who are engaged in the work here at the Legal Aid Clinic, as well as other presenters. It promises to be an informative section, and we look forward to seeing you then. We invite you, those of us who are online, to join us on Thursday, starting, I believe, at 10 o'clock, where we will have our Legal Aid Fair in person, where there will be several persons exhibiting our organization's exhibiting in our parking lot here at Gibraltar Hall Road on the university campus. We invite you to come and participate in that in Thursday's activities as we bring our legal aid fair to a close. Thank you once again for joining us, and we'll see you tomorrow.